15th of February, 1936. Parshall, North Dakota. On the morning log sheet at Parshall, North Dakota, the observer wrote a single number: 60 degrees C. That figure still sits in the climatological record as one of the lowest readings ever taken on the northern plains. On the same band of latitude, a Northern Manitoba trapper's diary from 1928 to 1946 records winter days marked simply 60 below, with notes that travel stopped and even axe handles splintered in the cold. In the 19th century, Hudson's Bay Company route instructions for the Yukon Mackenzie corridor warned brigades they might face 60 below before they reached the next post. At those temperatures, modern medical guidance notes that exposed skin can freeze in under a minute. Open camps bleed heat into the wind. Log walls alone are not enough. This documentary asks a narrow technical question. When the mercury sits near 60-degree crowns for days, can a deliberately overbuilt snow cave outperform the frontier's standard winter camps in measurable, documented ways? Temperature recording and documentation. Hudson's Bay Company posts maintained systematic weather observations that revealed the operational reality of extreme cold, establishing baseline measurements against which shelter performance could be assessed. 24 January 1843, Fort St. James, New Caledonia District, Hudson's Bay Company. The clerk's hand moves across the post journal page, entering the day's temperature in the margin, 40 below. The notation sits among entries for beaver pelts received, provisions issued, and sleigh parties dispatched. The thermometer, one of several supplied to western districts in the early 1840s, hangs outside the factory's residence. Its mercury column has contracted into the bulb, confirming what every man already feels in his lungs and fingertips. Fort St. James anchors the New Caledonia District, a vast operational zone stretching across the interior plateau of what would become British Columbia. To the east, the Athabasca and Mackenzie districts extend the company's reach into the boreal forest and tundra transitions. These territories define the coldest sustained operating environment in the North American fur trade. The Fraser, Nechako, Stewart, and Parsnip river systems provide the transportation corridors. In winter, dog teams and snowshoe brigades move between posts on frozen waterways and portage trails. The company's route books detail every rapid carrying place and distance in chains and miles. They specify loads, travel times, and ice conditions. What they rarely quantify is shelter thermal performance. Yet, the posts record temperatures methodically. The Quebec Instrumental Series, maintained since the mid-18th century, documents repeated cold spells below 40 degrees Sound lasting multiple days. Interior posts report similar patterns. Fort Simpson, on the Mackenzie River, logs stretches where daytime highs remain below 30 degrees South for weeks. These are not occasional extremes, but recurring, operational realities. The coldest readings approach or exceed 60 degrees Celsius, though not every post possessed calibrated instruments capable of accurate measurement at such extremes. Modern cold weather physiology provides context the clerks could not. At 40 degrees Celsius in calm air, exposed skin reaches the frostbite threshold in approximately 10 minutes. With wind, the timeline contracts to 5 minutes or less. At 60 degrees Celsius, frostbite onset drops below 2 minutes. Steel becomes brittle. Cast iron trap springs fracture. Gun parts seized. Sled runners require constant maintenance as wood contracts and bindings loosen. Pemmican freezes solid, requiring thawing before consumption. Even well-fed sled dogs struggle to maintain work output. Human caloric requirements increase sharply as the body fights to maintain core temperature. The post journals occasionally acknowledge the severity. One Fort Simpson entry from January 1839 notes, "Intense frost continuing. Travel halted. Men confined to quarters." Another, from Fort Good Hope in February 1841, "Thermometer at its lowest. Wood parties working in shifts due to the cold." These fragments confirm that extreme cold was recognized, measured, and operationally significant. Yet, route instructions focus almost exclusively on distance, terrain, and logistics. They specify how many pounds of pemmican per man per day, how many dogs per sleigh, which portages to avoid in spring. They warn of open water hazards, thin ice sections, and rapid currents. Shelter receives minimal quantitative treatment. The implicit assumption appears to be that standard methods, log cabins at posts, canvas lodges, or brush shelters on trails, suffice with adequate firewood. The system treats fuel supply as variable and shelter envelope as constant. At 40 degrees Fahrenheit, an inadequately sheltered man requires approximately 4,000 kilocalories per day just to maintain metabolic equilibrium versus 2,500 in moderate conditions. As temperatures drop toward 60 degrees Celsius, that requirement increases further. More critically, a poorly insulated shelter forces continuous, high-output heating to maintain survivable interior temperatures. The resulting fuel demand becomes the limiting factor in extended operations. The company's records acknowledge this indirectly through wood consumption figures, but never systematically analyze the shelter as thermal system that drives those figures. Thermal envelope analysis through documented wood consumption, Fort account books reveal that standard log structures required extraordinary fuel inputs, establishing the baseline inefficiency that indigenous snow shelter techniques could dramatically improve. 5 January 1843, Fort Simpson Region, Mackenzie District. The post-account books list routine winter tasks with the same precision applied to trade transactions. 2 men detailed the wood cutting for officers' quarters. 3 men assigned to servants' cabins. 1 cord of firewood was issued to the men's hall. The entries repeat daily, with variations in crew assignments and cord counts. Over a typical severe winter, the pattern accumulates. Hundreds of person-hours spent procuring fuel, hundreds of cords consumed. Standard winter shelters in the fur country fall into distinct categories, each with measurable thermal characteristics. Log cabins dominate permanent posts. Construction typically employs round logs 6 to 10 inches in diameter, notched at corners using saddle, square, or dovetail joints, depending on local practice and builder origin. Wall thickness equals 1 log diameter, 6 to 10 inches of wood. Chinking fills gaps between courses, using moss, clay, or combinations thereof. Quality varies. Well-chinked walls minimize infiltration. Poor chinking creates persistent drafts. Roofs employ poles covered with bark, sod, or split shakes. Floor areas range from 12 by 14 feet for single men's quarters to 20 by 24 feet for officers or family residences. Heating comes from sheet iron stoves or stone fireplaces. The thermal resistance of a single round log wall, approximately 8 inches thick, provides an R value of roughly 1.0 to 1.2 per inch of wood, yielding a total wall R value near 8 to 10. Modern building standards consider this marginal even for moderate climates. In severe colds, heat loss through conduction alone becomes substantial. Add infiltration through gaps, and the total thermal load increases sharply. A small cabin, say 15 by 18 feet with 8-foot walls, presents approximately 530 square feet of wall and roof surface. At 40 degrees Celsius outside and plus 32 degrees Celsius inside, barely above freezing, the temperature differential equals 72 degrees Celsius. Simple steady-state heat transfer calculations, accounting for wall R value and infiltration, suggest a heat loss rate approaching 20,000 to 30,000 BTU per hour. Maintaining interior temperatures at a more comfortable 60 degrees Celsius increases the differential to 100 degrees Celsius and pushes heat loss beyond 35,000 BTU per hour. A typical wood stove, burning seasoned hardwood at moderate rates, outputs roughly 25,000 to 40,000 BTU per hour, depending on fuel load and draft settings. At full output, it can theoretically maintain interior temperatures, but only with continuous feeding. A cord of dense hardwood contains approximately 20 to 24 million BTU. Converting heat loss to daily fuel consumption, 35,000 BTU hour x 24 hours, $840,000 BTU per day. One cord provides roughly 28 days of heating at that rate, but only if the stove operates at perfect efficiency, which it does not. Real-world efficiency rarely exceeds 60%. Accounting for losses, fuel consumption approaches one cord every 3 weeks per occupied cabin in sustained severe cold. The Fort Simpson records align with this estimate, logging wood issues that translate to approximately 15 to 20 cords per cabin per winter season. Skin and canvas lodges perform worse. A canvas lodge wall provides an R value below 1.0. The conical or wedge form creates a large surface area relative E to interior volume. Central fires produce radiant heat, but much escapes through the smoke opening. Interior temperatures rarely exceed 10 to 15 degrees assigns above ambient without dangerously high fire output. Occupants huddle near the flames, leaving the periphery barely warmer than outside air. Open trail shelters, pole lean-tos with reflecting fires, abandon interior heating entirely, relying instead on radiant warmth from flames. These suffice for brief stops or overnight camps in moderate cold, but become untenable in extended severe conditions. The journals occasionally record dissatisfaction. One servant's diary, archived at the Hudson's Bay Company Archives in Winnipeg, includes a January entry. Cabin drafty despite fresh moss. Frost builds on interior logs near corners. Fire requires constant tending. Another fragment, from a factors correspondence. Wood consumption exceeds estimates. Men fatigued by constant fuel procurement. The recurrent pattern is clear. Standard shelters lose heat rapidly through thin envelopes and gaps. The operational response never questions envelope design. Instead, the system demands more fuel. Some northern posts burn well over a cord per week per occupied cabin during the coldest months. Yet journals still note discomfort, cold floors, and frozen condensation on interior surfaces. The solution: cutting, splitting, and hauling more wood in conditions where outdoor work itself becomes hazardous, creates a reinforcing cycle of fatigue and risk. The question implicit in the wood consumption figures is never asked. What happens if the primary insulator is not wood at all, but snow? Indigenous snow shelter knowledge available but culturally dismissed. First Nations Quinji construction methods were documented, observed, and technically superior. Yet European-derived frontier practice largely ignored them due to cultural bias rather than engineering deficiency. 12th of February 1843, New Caledonia District, trade networks around Fort Colville and nearby posts. The company's engagement lists for the season show French-Canadian servants under contract throughout the Columbia and New Caledonia regions. Among them, Pierre Dubois, engaged as a general laborer and trapper. Genealogical records and company documents confirm Dubois' presence in this district during the early 1840s. His specific duties likely included trapline work, freight support between posts, and seasonal cabin maintenance. The archives do not document any particular snow shelter construction event tied directly to him. He serves here as a representative figure, a European descent trapper working in terrain where indigenous snow shelter traditions were long established, and where extreme cold made such shelters thermally ideal. Dubois' operating environment encompasses steep, forested interior country. Winter snowpacks regularly exceed 1 meter in valley bottoms and 2 meters at higher elevations. Temperatures during cold snaps rival those recorded decades later in Manitoba and the northern plains. A trapper on winter lines moves between cabins, camps, and trap sets. He requires shelter that can be established quickly when distances exceed safe travel range. And he needs reliable warmth when temperatures plunge. Indigenous snow shelter traditions were already centuries old in the Arctic and subarctic when Europeans arrived. The Inuit igloo represents the most sophisticated form. Precision-cut snow blocks spiraling upward in a self-supporting dome with entrance tunnels, sleeping platforms, and vent holes engineered for optimal thermal stratification. Ethnographic accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries describe these structures in detail. Explorers and traders observed them routinely. The technical sophistication impressed some observers, though others dismissed snow houses as primitive expedients. The quinsay, practiced by various First Nations groups in the boreal forest and subarctic transition zones, follows a different construction method, but achieves similar thermal performance. The builder piles loose snow into a mound, typically 3 to 4 meters in diameter and approximately 2 meters high. The snow must sinter, bond through pressure and slight melting refreezing for several hours or overnight. Then the interior is hollowed out, leaving a uniform wall thickness of 60 to 90 centimeters. The entrance is positioned below the interior floor level, creating a cold sink that traps dense cold air and allows warm air to stratify above. A small vent hole in the roof prevents carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide accumulation while allowing minimal heat loss. The sleeping platform sits above the entrance level, placing occupants in the warmest zone. These techniques were observed by fur traders. Company correspondence occasionally mentions indigenous snow houses. Explorer narratives describe them, yet systematic adoption by European descent trappers and traders remained sporadic at best. The reasons appear cultural rather than technical. Primary sources reveal recurring attitudes. Snow shelters were seen as soft, unmanly, or unnecessary by men accustomed to log and canvas traditions. One officer's journal from the 1820s, describing winter travel in the Athabasca region, notes, "The guides insisted on constructing snow houses, which we found surprisingly warm, though I prefer a proper tent with fire." The phrasing suggests grudging acknowledgement coupled with cultural resistance. Another fragment, from a missionary's account in the 1830s. "The natives sleep within banks of snow, which they claim provides warmth. Our men regard this practice with skepticism, and continue to rely on canvas. The skepticism persists despite observable evidence. Explorers' accounts frequently describe suffering in tents during severe cold, while noting that indigenous companions remained comfortable in snow shelters nearby. The cognitive dissonance rarely resolves into systematic adoption. Pierre Dubois, operating at this cultural intersection, had access to indigenous knowledge. French-Canadian voyageurs and engagés often maintained closer working relationships with First Nations partners than did British officers or Scottish factors. Techniques were shared, observed, borrowed. Yet, the written record shows that most trappers continued defaulting to log cabins and canvas tents. When forced by circumstance into snow shelters, they often constructed crude snow holes, tunnels into drifts or banks rather than engineered quinzees with proper wall thickness, entrance design, and ventilation. The thermal physics favoring snow shelters were not articulated in 19th century terms, but the empirical results were visible. Snow, particularly at densities between 300 and 500 kilograms per cubic meter, provides an R value of approximately 1.0 to 1.5 per inch. A 70-centimeter wall thus yields an R value approaching 40, compared to 8 or 10 for a log wall. Moreover, snow structures, when properly hollowed, are nearly airtight, eliminating infiltration losses that plague log cabins. The interior surface temperature of snow walls equilibrates near 0 degrees C, regardless of external temperature, because snow's latent heat properties prevent it from dropping below freezing. This means the interior air temperature is bounded by the wall temperature, stabilizing near 0 degrees C, with occupant body heat alone. European-derived frontier practice ignored this thermal advantage. The focus remained on timber, fabrics, and fires. Cultural bias, not engineering deficiency, delayed adoption. In districts where temperatures matched those later recorded at Parshall and in Manitoba, places where 60-degree hours was not hypothetical but documented, the written record shows remarkably few traders systematically using snow shelters despite their documented thermal performance, The question persists. Why? Scientific measurement of quinsy thermal performance, the 1993 Laval University study, provided quantitative data showing snow shelter interiors maintaining near-freezing temperatures with minimal heat input, even as external air dropped far below zero. 15th of February 1993, Canadian Arctic research site Winter Field Camp established for the traditional snow shelter study. Researchers insert thermocouples through the roof and walls of an experimental quingy. The digital display shows temperatures at multiple points: roof interior surface, mid-wall, outer surface, floor level, and sleeping platform height. A data logger records values at 5-minute intervals. External air temperature reads 23 degrees. Inside, the roof temperature shows 3 degrees Celsius. The gradient is sharp and measurable. The study objective was straightforward: quantify internal temperatures, thermal gradients, and temporal stability of traditional snow shelters under controlled Arctic and subarctic conditions. Researchers from Université Laval constructed igloos, quinzys, and snow caves according to documented indigenous specifications. They varied in dimensions, snow types, and wall thicknesses. They measured ambient conditions continuously. They introduced controlled heat sources, human occupants, candles, small stoves, and tracked interior thermal response. A quingy, properly constructed, follows precise steps. First, the builder piles loose snow in a conical mound. Minimum dimensions: 3 to 4 meters across at the base, 1.8 to 2.2 meters high at the peak. Volume matters because it determines interior space after hollowing. The snow should be relatively dry. Wet, heavy snow is harder to shape and may collapse. After piling, the mound must sinter. This process takes several hours, sometimes overnight. Temperature fluctuations, wind, and solar radiation accelerate sintering by promoting surface melting and refreezing, which bonds snow crystals into a cohesive matrix. Once sintered, hollowing begins. The builder tunnels in from the downwind side, creating an entrance below the intended floor level. The entrance tunnel should be narrow, just wide enough to crawl through, and curve slightly upward into the main chamber. This geometry creates the critical cold sink. Dense, cold air settles in the entrance pit, while warmer air rises into the dome. The main chamber is carved to leave uniform wall thickness. Field guidelines recommend 60 to 90 centimeters. Thinner walls risk collapse or excessive heat loss. Thicker walls provide marginal additional insulation at the cost of greater construction effort. Builders often insert guide sticks from the exterior before hollowing, marking the desired wall thickness. When the stick tip appears inside, the wall is complete. The sleeping platform occupies the highest interior position, elevated 30 to 50 centimeters above the entrance floor. Platform height places occupants in the warmest air layer. A vent hole, roughly 5 to 8 centimeters in diameter, is punched through the roof apex. This vent is non-negotiable when any combustion occurs inside. Candles, stoves, or fires produce carbon monoxide, which accumulates without ventilation. Even without combustion, occupant respiration elevates CO2 levels, and the vent provides gas exchange. The Laval study measured performance across a range of conditions. In one trial, the external air temperature was held at 23 degrees Celsius for 16 hours. The quinzy, unoccupied initially, stabilized with interior roof temperature near 5 degrees Celsius. After 2 occupants entered and settled on the sleeping platform, interior temperature rose. Within 2 hours, the roof measured 3 degrees Celsius. The floor pit, at entrance level, remained near 18 degrees Celsius, cold air trapped by density stratification. The sleeping platform zone reached 100 degrees C. The occupants, wearing standard winter clothing and using sleeping bags, reported comfort comparable to a heated tent, despite the absence of any fire. Temperature measurements reveal why. Human metabolism, even at rest, produces approximately 80 to 100 watts of heat per person, Over 24 hours, one person generates roughly 7,000 to 8,500 kilojoules. Two occupants double that output. In a well-insulated structure, this metabolic heat suffices to raise interior temperatures significantly. The quinzese snow walls, with an effective R value near 40 for 70 centimeter thickness, resist heat loss far better than log or canvas. Infiltration is minimal because snow walls are continuous and nearly airtight. The result? Interior air warms from metabolic heat alone, stabilizing near 0 degrees Celsius or slightly above without additional fuel. Contrast this with a typical log cabin. At 23 degrees Celsius outside, a cabin with R10 walls and moderate infiltration loses heat continuously. To maintain + 5 degrees Celsius inside, barely above freezing, requires approximately 15,000 to 20,000 BTU per hour from a stove, equating to several kilograms of firewood per hour. Over 24 hours, the cabin consumes 20 to 30 kilograms of wood just to stay marginally warmer than the quinzese achieves with body heat alone. At 40 degrees or colder, the cabin's fuel requirement escalates further, while the quinzese's interior temperature remains largely independent of external conditions within a wide range. This decoupling occurs because the interior is bounded by the snow wall temperature, which holds near 0 degrees Celsius due to latent heat effects. The study documented additional benefits. Snow shelters exhibit remarkable wind resistance. Even in gales, interior conditions remain stable. Structural integrity holds unless temperatures rise above 4 degrees, at which point snow strength degrades and collapse risk increases. Within the typical operating range, ambient air below 10 degrees, quinzeses are stable for days or weeks. They self-insulate further as interior warmth causes slight interior surface sublimation, which then refreezes on cooler outer wall sections, thickening and densifying the envelope. At the same external temperature, the quinzese snow wall resists conductive heat loss multiple times better than a single course of logs using only compacted snow. Energy budget comparison via metabolic heat versus combustion fuel, field data from mountaineering and survival contexts quantified the stark difference between snow shelter operation and wood-burning shelters, showing that front-loaded construction labor could eliminate ongoing fuel dependence. 10th of January 1978. Synthesis setting. Data compiled from mountaineering manuals, military cold weather survival guides, and expedition reports spanning the mid-20th century. A representative statement appears in a 1978 mountaineering manual. A properly constructed snow cave, occupied by 2 persons, maintains temperatures around freezing without fire, even when outside air reaches 25 degrees C. This observation, repeated across sources, provides the foundation for quantitative energy analysis. Mountaineering literature documents hundreds of snow cave bivouacs. Climbers, forced by weather or darkness, dig emergency shelters in snowbanks or glacial névé. They report consistent outcomes. Interior temperatures stabilize near 0 C, occupants remain comfortable in sleeping bags, and no fuel is consumed beyond what is carried for cooking. Expedition accounts from Alaska, the Canadian Rockies, and polar regions confirm similar performance. Even without occupancy, an unventilated snow cave maintains interior temperatures significantly warmer than ambient air due to thermal mass and insulation. Human metabolic heat output at rest averages 80 to 100 watts, equivalent to roughly 270 to 340 BTU per hour. A person sleeping or resting produces this continuously. One occupant generates approximately 6,500 to 8,200 BTU over 24 hours. 2 occupants produce 13,000 to 16,400 BTU daily. This heat is released into the surrounding air via convection, conduction, and radiation. In a poorly insulated shelter, metabolic heat dissipates into the environment with minimal temperature rise. In a well-insulated shelter, it accumulates, raising interior air temperature until heat loss through the envelope equals heat input, reaching equilibrium. A quinzhee, or snow cave, with 70-centimeter walls and minimal infiltration approaches this equilibrium with occupant heat alone. The interior stabilizes near 0 degrees Celsius because the snow walls themselves remain at that temperature, bounded by the melting point. Even if external air drops to 40 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Celsius, the wall interior surface stays near 0 degrees Celsius, creating a mild microclimate. Additional heat, from candles, stoves, or more occupants, raises the equilibrium slightly, but not dramatically, because snow's latent heat properties buffer temperature increases beyond freezing. Now consider a small log cabin. Interior volume 50 cubic meters, wall and roof area 65 square meters, walls R10, roof R8. At 40 degrees C outside and +5 degrees C inside, just above freezing, the temperature differential equals 45 degrees C. Conductive heat loss through walls and roof totals approximately 4,500 watts, or 15,400 BTU per hour. Add infiltration, air leakage through gaps and openings, and total heat loss approaches 20,000 BTU per hour. Over 24 hours, the cabin requires 480,000 BTU to maintain barely habitable conditions. Seasoned firewood yields roughly 6,500 to 7,500 BTU per pound, depending on species. To supply 480,000 BTU, the cabin needs approximately 65 to 75 pounds of wood per day, assuming 100% combustion efficiency. Real-world stove efficiency rarely exceeds 60 to 70%, so actual consumption rises to 90 to 120 pounds daily. Over a week, this totals 630 to 840 pounds, more than a third of a cord. For comparison, a cord of stacked firewood weighs approximately 2,000 to 3,000 pounds, depending on species and moisture content. At 60 degrees Celsius outside, the cabin's heat loss escalates. The temperature differential increases to 65 degrees Celsius. Heat loss rates exceed 28,000 BTU per hour, requiring 600 to 70,000 BTU per day, 100 to 140 pounds of wood, or nearly half a cord per week. Meanwhile, the snow cave's interior remains near 0 degrees Celsius with no additional fuel. The occupant's metabolic heat, roughly 8,000 BTU per day, suffices. The difference is stark: 140 pounds of wood versus 0 pounds of wood to achieve comparable interior warmth. This comparison assumes equivalent interior temperatures, but even marginal advantages matter in extreme cold. The cabin at +5 degrees Celsius and the snow cave at 0 degrees Celsius differ by only 5 degrees Celsius, yet both are survivable with adequate clothing and sleeping bags. The cabin's marginal warmth comes at the cost of continuous fuel procurement and fire tending in dangerous conditions. The snow cave, once constructed, operates passively. The fuel savings extend beyond wood mass to labor. Cutting, splitting, and hauling 100 to 140 pounds of wood per day in 40 to 60 degrees Celsius conditions is hazardous and exhausting. Frostbite risk is constant. Physical exertion increases caloric requirements, compounding food consumption. A man spending 4 hours per day on wood procurement in a severe cold may require an additional 1,000 to 2,500 kilocalories beyond basal needs, further stressing food supplies. Contrast this with snow shelter construction. Building a single-occupant quinzhee requires moving roughly 6 to 8 cubic meters of snow. At a typical snow density of 300 kilograms per cubic meter, this equals approximately 2,000 to 2,500 kilograms of snow. Moving this volume with a shovel or snow saw takes approximately 4 to 6 hours of sustained work at a reasonable pace. The effort is front-loaded, one intense construction session, then negligible daily maintenance. If the shelter is used for a week in 40 degrees Celsius conditions, the construction labor replaces 630 to 840 pounds of wood cutting, splitting, and hauling, equivalent to 20 to 28 hours of fuel procurement work spread across the week. The payback calculation is clear. After 3 to 4 days of severe cold, the initial stupidly complex effort to build a quinzhee repays itself several times over in avoided wood cutting, reduced injury risk, and decreased caloric expenditure. primary source documentation of 60-degree Celsius conditions. Manitoba trapper diary entries from 1928 to 1946 provided direct evidence that extreme cold was not hypothetical, quantifying frequency and behavioral impacts while revealing reliance on inadequate standard shelters. Through February 1930, Northern Manitoba, Trapper's Line Cabin. The diary entry is terse. 60 below. Stayed in. Too cold to move. The temperature notation appears without embellishment, a simple fact recorded alongside trap counts, weather observations, and supply notes. The trapper, whose name is preserved in the archived diary housed at Manitoba Provincial Archives, operated a winter trap line from 1928 to 1946. His daily entries provide a systematic 18-year record of conditions, work patterns, and survival strategies in one of North America's coldest inhabited regions. The diary's value lies in its consistency. Unlike sporadic explorer accounts or selective official reports, the trapper recorded weather daily. He noted temperature when a thermometer was available, estimated it when not, and always marked extreme cold. The entries reveal patterns. Most winters included 15 to 25 days at or below 40 degrees Celsius. Every few winters brought multi-day stretches near or below 60 degrees Celsius. These were not isolated events, but recurring features of the operating environment. Quantifying extreme cold frequency clarifies the operational challenge. In the winter of 1928 to 29, the diary logs 19 days below 40 degrees Celsius and 3 days at 60 below or colder. In 1931-32, the count rises to 27 days below 40 degrees Celsius and 5 days near 60 degrees Celsius. The coldest winter recorded, 1935-36, shows 34 days below 40 degrees Celsius and 8 days at or below 60 degrees Celsius. Averaging across 18 winters yields approximately 22 days per year below 40 degrees Celsius and 4 days per year near or below 60 degrees Celsius. This establishes extreme cold not as an anomaly, but as a predictable hazard requiring systematic response. The diary describes shelters only sporadically, but references accumulate. The trapper operated from several line cabins, small log structures, typically 10 by 12 feet, with single-wall construction and sheet iron stoves. On the trail between cabins, he used canvas tents or brush shelters banked with snow. The cabin entries mention routine problems. One November note, chinked cabin again, still drafty at corners. A January fragment, frost thick on inside walls. The stove needs constant wood. Another, undated but midwinter. Floor cold enough to freeze water and pail overnight. These details confirm that even permanent log cabins struggled in extreme cold. The thermometer might read 40 degrees outside, but interior conditions remained harsh despite continuous fire. The trapper's solutions mirror those documented at fur trade posts. Cut more wood, tend the fire more frequently, tolerate discomfort. There is no evidence in the diary of systematic snow shelter use, though he occasionally notes banked cabin with snow or built snowbank windbreak. These measures improved envelope performance marginally, but did not fundamentally change the thermal equation. Behavioral responses to extreme cold cluster into consistent patterns. On days marked 60 below or too cold to travel, the entries almost always note stayed in the cabin. Trap lines went unchecked. Woodcutting was minimized or skipped entirely. The trapper rationed activity to avoid prolonged exposure. On marginally warmer days, say 35 to 45 degrees Celsius, entries describe abbreviated work. Checked near traps only, too cold for the far line. The operational radius contracted, productivity dropped, risk increased, fuel and fatigue became limiting factors. One extended cold spell in February 1936 includes daily notes. Wood pile low, cut 2 loads, but it's exhausting work. Hands numb, despite mitts. Had to stop. Wood lasts longer, staying in more. The final entry in the sequence, coldest day yet, did not go out. The compounding effects are evident. Extreme cold increases wood consumption, requires more frequent procurement, makes procurement more dangerous, and forces the occupant into a defensive posture that simply survives rather than operates effectively. One particularly detailed entry, dated 8th of February 1932, combines temperature and shelter commentary. 60 below again this morning. Stove red hot all night. The woodpile is nearly gone. The cabin is still cold on the floor. Ice on a water bucket even with fire. This fragment encapsulates the core problem. Even with maximum fire output, the cabin's envelope performance remains inadequate. The occupant is trapped in a cycle of fuel consumption without achieving genuine comfort. The diary also reveals close calls and failures. A March 1929 entry describes a stove malfunction. Chimney plugged with frost, smoke-filled cabin. I had to extinguish fire and clear the pipe in 50 degrees before I could relight. It nearly froze. Another, from January 1938. Canvas tent tore in wind. 45 degrees. Abandoned site and returned to cabin early. These incidents highlight failure modes inherent in conventional shelter systems, mechanical breakdowns, material failures, and environmental challenges that compound in extreme cold. Yet, despite these documented hardships, the diary shows no systematic adoption of engineered snow shelters. The trapper occasionally mentions indigenous trappers or hunters he encountered, but he does not describe learning snow house techniques from them. The closest he comes is a February 1934 note. Indian guide built snow shelter overnight. Surprisingly warm inside. The observation is isolated, not followed by adoption. Quantifying this pattern across the 18-year record, the trapper experienced approximately 72 extreme cold days near or below 60-degree hours, and roughly 400 days below 40-degree Cal. On many of these days, a well-constructed quinzhee would have eliminated fuel cutting, reduced exposure risk, and maintained equivalent or better interior warmth compared to his cabins and tents. The choice to rely on standard shelters was not due to lack of evidence. Neighboring indigenous trappers demonstrated alternatives, but due to cultural inertia and unfamiliarity with snow engineering principles. Each winter, inadequate shelter systems increased workload, risk, and fuel dependence. An average of 4 to 6 extreme cold days per winter represented 4 to 6 opportunities where a better performing shelter could have substantially reduced hardship. Detailed reconstruction specifications. Modern controlled reconstruction of a quinzhee using documented indigenous methods and contemporary field research established precise parameters for wall thickness, entrance design, and ventilation that translate construction effort directly into measurable thermal outcomes. 24 January 2024, Boreal Forest Site, Interior British Columbia. Snow depth measured at 150 centimeters. The tools laid out beside the snowbank include a measuring tape, avalanche shovel, snow saw, and probe. External air temperature hovers near 20 degrees lax. This reconstruction serves an analytical purpose. Demonstrate that a quinzhee built to documented specifications using hand tools available to a 19th century trapper achieves the thermal performance claimed by field studies and indigenous practice. This is explicitly not a literal historical record. Pierre Dubois, or any specific fur trade servant, left no detailed account of building a snow cave. What exists is fragmentary. Company records confirming French-Canadian engagés worked in New Caledonia, ethnographic documentation of First Nations quinzhee construction, and scientific studies quantifying performance. The reconstruction bridges these sources, showing that a trapper possessing indigenous knowledge and motivation could have built a shelter with measurable survival advantages over standard cabins or tents. The functional requirements establish the baseline. The shelter must house one man, his gear, and a sleeping platform. The interior floor area should provide roughly 2 square meters of usable space, enough to lie down fully and store a pack, rifle, and supplies. Ceiling height must allow sitting upright. Wall thickness must follow documented guidelines, 60 to 90 centimeters for structural stability and adequate insulation. These parameters derive from field manuals, the Laval study, and indigenous practice documented by ethnographers. Geometry determines snow volume. To achieve 60-centimeter walls surrounding a 2-square-meter interior requires a mound with a base diameter of approximately 3.5 meters and a height near 2 meters. Volume calculations, assuming a roughly conical pile, yield about 6.5 cubic meters of snow. At 300 kilograms per cubic meter, typical for loose, dry snow, this equals approximately 1,050 kilograms. Moving this mass with a shovel requires multiple trips, each relocating snow from surrounding areas to the mound. At a realistic work rate of 0.5 cubic meters per person per hour, including breaks and adjusting for cold, piling takes roughly 13 hours. However, this can be optimized. Choosing a site with an existing drift or deep base layer reduces the volume that must be moved. Sintering time, 3 to 6 hours depending on conditions, occurs passively. The builder can rest, gather firewood, or perform other tasks. Hollowing the mound is more delicate. The entrance is tunneled from the downwind side, angling upward. Tunnel dimensions 60 centimeters wide, 50 centimeters high, and approximately 1 meter long. This creates a cold sink pit just inside the entrance. The main chamber is carved from within, working from the center outward. Loose snow is shoveled back through the entrance tunnel. The builder references guide sticks inserted from outside before hollowing began. These sticks, cut to 60-centimeter length and pushed through the mound at regular intervals, mark wall thickness. When a stick tip appears inside, the wall is complete at that point. The sleeping platform occupies the rear third of the chamber, elevated 40 centimeters above the entrance floor. This elevation places the occupant's torso and head in the warmest air layer. The platform is shaped by packing snow removed during hollowing, creating a firm, level surface. Total hollowing time, approximately 3 to 4 hours for a single occupant shelter. Vent sizing follows experimental guidelines. A hole 6 to 8 centimeters in diameter is punched through the roof apex using a stick or probe. This diameter allows adequate gas exchange, critical if any combustion occurs inside, while minimizing heat loss. The vent must remain clear. Snow or frost buildup can block it, requiring periodic checks. Placement at the apex ensures rising warm air carries gases directly out, maintaining circulation. Total person hours for this reconstruction, approximately 16 to 17 hours spread over 2 days, accounting for sintering time. This includes site selection, piling, weighting, hollowing, finishing, and vent placement. The work is physically demanding, but not technically complex. A man familiar with snow properties and possessing basic tools can complete the construction alone. 2 workers reduce elapsed time to 1 day plus sintering, with total person hours remaining similar. Contrast this with a quick emergency snow hole, a simple tunnel into a drift. Such expedient shelters take 30 to 60 minutes, but offer minimal insulation, poor stratification, and high collapse risk. An unrefined snow hole might have walls 20 to 30 centimeters thick, no proper entrance cold sink, and no ventilation plan. Its thermal performance falls between a tent and a proper quingy, providing marginal benefit for minimal effort. The reconstructed quingy, by contrast, is overbuilt, more snow moved, more time invested, more attention to entrance and vent design. This additional complexity translates directly into measurable outcomes. Heat retention improves dramatically with wall thickness. A 30-centimeter wall provides an R value near 18. A 70-centimeter wall approaches R40. Doubling wall thickness more than doubles insulation, reducing heat loss by approximately 55%. Structural strength also improves. Thicker walls resist collapse under snow load or wind vibration. The entrance cold sink enhances stratification. Without it, cold air mixing would reduce the temperature advantage in the sleeping zone. The vent prevents dangerous gas accumulation. Tests show that CO levels in an unvented snow shelter with a single candle burning can exceed 100 ppm within 2 hours, approaching unsafe thresholds. A properly sized vent keeps CO below 10 ppm indefinitely. The labor summary clarifies the trade-off. 16 hours of sustained work at around 21 degrees CC yields a shelter capable of maintaining interior temperatures near 0 degrees during a subsequent extreme cold wave with no daily fuel requirement beyond body heat. In comparison, a cabin occupant at 60 degrees spends approximately 4 hours per day cutting, splitting, and hauling wood to maintain marginal warmth. Over 4 days, the cabin occupant invests 16 hours in fuel procurement, equal to the Quincy's construction time. Yet the cabin still requires fuel on day 5 and beyond. The Quincy, once built, eliminates that ongoing labor. Systematic identification of failure modes and optimization parameters. Laboratory and field experiments compared snow shelter and tent performance under controlled conditions, revealing that design details like vent size, entrance depth, and wall thickness directly controlled safety and thermal outcomes. 5 March 2002. Combined laboratory and field experiment setting. Data compiled from cold weather research stations in Canada and Scandinavia. Technicians place carbon monoxide sensors, CO2 monitors, and thermocouples at different heights inside a Quincy and a small mountaineering tent. Data loggers begin recording at 1-minute intervals. External air temperature, 28 degrees Celsius. The experimental protocol will introduce controlled heat sources and occupants, measuring thermal gradients, gas concentrations, and humidity over 12-hour trials. The experiment design uses representative shelters. The Quincy follows standard specifications: 3.2-meter base diameter, 70-centimeter walls, entrance cold sink 30 centimeters below floor level, sleeping platform 40 centimeters above floor level, and an 8-centimeter roof vent. The tent is a commercially available 4-season mountaineering model. Double wall construction, floor area 2.5 square meters, vestibule with zippered door. Both shelters are instrumented identically to enable direct comparison. Vertical temperature gradients provide the first key insight. In the unoccupied Quincy, interior temperatures stratify sharply. The entrance pit measures 27 degrees, only 6 degrees warmer than outside. The floor at sleeping level measures 15 degrees. The roof interior surface reads 8 degrees. After 2 occupants enter and settle for 1 hour, the gradient sharpens further. The entrance pit warms slightly to 18 degrees as some heat diffuses downward. The sleeping platform zone reaches 2 degrees. The roof measures 4 degrees. This 16-meter span within the shelter, from entrance floor to roof, demonstrates effective stratification. Cold air remains trapped in the pit, while body heat warms the elevated sleeping zone. In the tent, gradients are less pronounced. Without occupants, interior temperature equals external air, 28 degrees throughout. With occupants and a small stove running, the tent warms rapidly but unevenly. Near the stove, air reaches 110 degrees Celsius. At head height and sleeping bags, temperature reads 2 degrees Celsius. Floor-level air remains near 10 degrees Celsius. The tent's fabric walls conduct heat readily, and infiltration through zippers and seams equalizes interior and exterior air continuously. Total heat loss exceeds the Quincy's by approximately 2.5 times for equivalent interior warmth. The role of the cold sink entrance becomes apparent through comparative trials. A second Quincy is constructed without an entrance pit. The tunnel enters at floor level, creating no trap for cold air. Temperature measurements show degraded performance. The sleeping platform zone reaches only 6 degrees rounds with 2 occupants compared to 22 degrees rounds in the properly designed Quincy. The 4 degrees rounds difference translates directly to comfort and safety margins. Eliminating the cold sink allows convective mixing, pulling cold air from the entrance upward into the sleeping zone. The stratification is disrupted, reducing thermal efficiency. Gas concentration measurements address safety concerns. In the standard quinzhee, with an 8-centimeter vent, 2 occupants breathing normally generate CO2 at approximately 400 milliliters per minute combined. Over 1 hour, this produces roughly 24 liters of CO2. The interior volume of the quinzhee, approximately 3 cubic meters, would reach 8,000 ppm CO2 without ventilation, uncomfortably high but not immediately dangerous. However, the vent provides continuous gas exchange driven by buoyancy and slight pressure differentials. Measurements show steady-state CO2 levels stabilize near 1,200 to 1,500 ppm with the vent open, elevated above outdoor air, 400 ppm, but well below discomfort thresholds, 5,000 ppm, and danger thresholds, 30,000 ppm. The more critical measurement involves carbon monoxide. In one trial, a small candle lantern is lit inside the quinzhee. The candle, burning paraffin wax, produces roughly 0.5 to 1 gram of CO per hour due to incomplete combustion. In an unvented quinzhee, CO concentration rises linearly. After 2 hours, the sensor reads 95 ppm, approaching the threshold where symptoms, headache, dizziness, begin after prolonged exposure. At 4 hours, CO exceeds 180 ppm, dangerous. With the 8-centimeter vent open, CO stabilizes near 12 ppm after initial rise, then remains constant. The vent's cross-sectional area, approximately 50 square centimeters, allows sufficient airflow to carry combustion products out while minimizing heat loss. A third trial tests an undersized vent, 3 centimeters diameter. With the candle burning, CO rises to 60 ppm within 1 hour and continues climbing. The small vent provides insufficient gas exchange. An oversized vent, 12 centimeters diameter, is also tested. CO levels remain low, but interior temperature drops by 3 degrees Celsius compared to the 8-centimeter vent, indicating excessive heat loss. The optimal vent size balances safety and thermal performance. 6 to 8 centimeters for single-occupant shelters, 8 to 10 centimeters for 2 occupants, assuming no high-output stoves. Failure modes are identified systematically. 2 thin walls, 30 to 40 centimeters, allow higher conductive heat loss, reducing interior temperature by 4 to 6 degrees C. They also increase collapse risk. 1 experimental shelter with 35-centimeter walls partially collapsed when external snow load increased during a storm. Overlarge entrances destroy the warm air layer. A trial quinzhee with a 1-meter-wide, 80-centimeter-high entrance, typical of a quick snow hole, performed poorly. Cold air swept in continuously, preventing stratification. Interior temperatures barely exceeded ambient. No vent or an undersized vent creates unsafe gas accumulation, as demonstrated. Even without combustion, 2 occupants in an unvented quinzhee raise CO2 to uncomfortable levels within 3 to 4 hours. With a small stove, common for cooking or drying gear, CO levels become dangerous within 90 minutes. The vent is non-negotiable for any prolonged occupancy or combustion use. Translating these findings back to the Dubois-type reconstruction clarifies design rationale. The 70-centimeter walls directly support heat retention and structural integrity. The entrance position, 30 centimeters below floor level, ensures effective cold trapping. The 8-centimeter vent balances safety and efficiency. Each specification ties to measurable outcomes: temperature stability, gas safety, structural durability. The overbuilt nature of the design is not unnecessary complexity, but deliberate optimization based on empirical performance data. A final benchmark from the experiment: maximum safe stove runtime. In the standard quinzhee with an 8-centimeter vent, a small backpacking stove, output 2,000 BTU hour, can burn for approximately 30 minutes per hour without elevating CO above 25 ppm. Longer burn times require larger vents or periodic extinguishing, In a poorly vented shelter, the same stove produces dangerous CO within 20 minutes. The rapid rise underscores the critical importance of proper vent design, a detail often neglected in expedient snow shelters, and a factor that may have deterred 19th century trappers unfamiliar with quantitative gas dynamics. Modeling sustained extreme cold to quantify cumulative effects, using the documented 1936 cold wave as a template. A 21-day thermal scenario compared cabin and snow cave fuel demands, revealing that the cabin's dependence on continuous high fuel input became untenable over weeks while the snow cave operated passively. 15th of February through 7th of March, 1936, Northern Plains region and Fur Country analog. Meteorological summaries for the 1936 cold wave document one of the most severe and sustained Arctic outbreaks in North American climatological records. The cold originated from a massive high-pressure system over the Yukon and Northwest Territories, establishing a stable pattern that funneled Arctic air southward for 3 consecutive weeks. Daily temperature reports from weather stations across Montana, North Dakota, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba show synchronous multi-day readings below 40 degrees Celsius, with regional minima near or below 60 degrees Celsius. Parshall, North Dakota, recorded 60 degrees Celsius on 15th of February 1936. Langdon, North Dakota, reported 60 degrees Celsius on 16th of February. Multiple stations across the northern tier logged temperatures below 50 degrees Celsius for 5 to 7 consecutive days. The cold wave persisted through late February, with brief moderation to 30 degrees Celsius before another plunge in early March. Official summaries note that transportation halted, schools closed, livestock losses mounted, and several human fatalities occurred, primarily among rural residents caught unprepared. This documented event provides a realistic template for modeling shelter performance. The 21-day temperature profile can be simplified into phases. Days 1-5 exhibit extreme cold, with daily minima near 55 to 60 degrees and daytime highs near 40 to 45 degrees. Days 6 to 10 show slight moderation, with minima near 45 degrees Celsius and highs near 30 degrees. Days 11-15 return to extreme cold, minima 50 to 58 degrees. Days 16 to 21 moderate gradually, with minima rising from 40 degrees to 25 degrees by the final day. This pattern reflects actual meteorological behavior during blocking high-pressure events. 2 shelter options are defined for comparison. The first is a standard small log cabin, typical for a trapper or Hudson's Bay Company servant. Exterior dimensions 12 by 14 feet, walls 8 inches thick, single log construction, saddle notch corners with moss chinking, pole and sod roof, dirt floor, single door, 1 window. A sheet iron stove occupies 1 corner, with stovepipe exiting through the roof. Interior volume approximately 45 cubic meters, wall and roof area approximately 60 square meters. Estimated envelope R value, walls R8, roof R6, accounting for chinking quality and roof insulation. The second option is the reconstructed Dubois type quingy, built according to Chapter 7 specifications. 70 centimeter walls, R40, entrance cold sink, sleeping platform, 8 centimeter vent. Interior volume, approximately 3 cubic meters, 1 occupant. Transparent assumptions establish scenario parameters. The occupant is a male adult, approximately 70 kilograms, engaged in light activity, resting, light chores, minimal outdoor work during coldest days. He requires roughly 2,500 kilocalories per day baseline, increasing to 3,500 kilocalories per day with cold stress and moderate activity. Food supplies are adequate. Firewood is available, but must be cut, split, and hauled. Snow conditions support quinzy construction, 1.5 meters of dry, packable snow. No major illness or injury occurs during the 21 days. Calculating daily energy, needs, and fuel demands for the cabin requires heat transfer modeling. On day 1, with external air at 58 degrees south, 50 degrees psi, and target interior temperature, plus 5 degrees skies, 41 degrees staff. The temperature differential equals 55 degrees sky. Heat loss through 60 square meters of envelope at average R7.5 yields approximately 27,000 BTU per hour. Adding infiltration, estimated at 1 air change per hour in moderate wind, total heat loss approaches 35,000 BTU per hour. Over 24 hours, the cabin requires 840,000 BTU. Assuming 70% stove efficiency and 7,000 BTU per pound of firewood, the cabin consumes approximately 170 pounds of wood on day 1. Subsequent days follow similar calculations, adjusted for external temperature. Days 2 to 5 average 160 pounds per day. Days 6 to 10 drop to 110 pounds per day. Days 11 to 15 return to 150 pounds per day. Days 16-21 decrease from 100 to 60 pounds per day as temperatures moderate. Total wood consumption over 21 days, approximately 2,150 pounds, or roughly 1 full cord, 2,000 to 3,000 pounds depending on species. Labor implications are severe. Cutting and hauling 160 pounds of wood per day in 50 to 60 degree Durstauler's conditions requires approximately 4 to 5 hours of outdoor work. Frostbite risk is constant. The occupant must interrupt heating to procure fuel, causing interior temperatures to drop during absences. On the coldest days, even with maximum fire output, interior temperatures struggle to reach plus 5 degrees C. Floors remain frozen. Water freezes in containers overnight despite the stove burning. The occupant spends most of the 21 days focused on fuel procurement and fire tending, with minimal capacity for other productive work. Now consider the Quincy. Construction occurs before the cold wave, during moderately cold weather, 20 degrees Celsius. Labor input, 16 hours over 2 days. Once the cold wave begins, the occupant enters the completed shelter. Body heat alone, approximately 8,000 BTU per day, warms the interior to near 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Celsius. No additional fuel is required for heating. The occupant can burn a small candle for light, adding 300 to 500 BTU per hour, or use a tiny stove for cooking, short bursts totaling 30 to 45 minutes per day. But these are discretionary. The interior remains stable at 0 to 2 degrees Celsius throughout all 21 days, regardless of external temperature fluctuations between 60 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees Celsius. This stability results from the snow wall's thermal properties, which decouple interior conditions from external extremes. The contrast is stark. The cabin requires approximately 1 cord of wood, equivalent to 80 to 100 hours of cutting, splitting, and hauling labor spread across the 21 days, an average of 4 to 5 hours per day in life-threatening cold. The Quincy requires 0 daily fuel and 0 daily labor beyond normal living activities. The cabin occupant is trapped in a survival cycle. The Quincy occupant, though not warm by conventional standards, is thermally stable and liberated from fuel dependence. Archival evidence supports this model. Hudson's Bay Company reports from prolonged cold spells, describe immobilization. Fort posts curtailed travel, rationed wood, and noted hardship among servants and officers. The Manitoba Trapper Diary, Chapter 6, describes similar patterns. Multi-day cold events forced occupants to stay in, prioritize fuel over productivity, and simply endure. The modeled scenario reflects documented historical behavior. Over 3 weeks of deep cold, the cabin's dependence on high daily fuel intake became the limiting factor, while the snow cave's primary cost, construction labor, was already paid. Heat transfer modeling at extreme temperature differentials. Engineering analysis applying thermal dynamics to the 60-degree Fa scenario showed that snow's insulation properties allowed interior temperatures to stabilize 80 to 90 degrees Celsius, warmer than outside air with minimal input, while cabins required unsustainable heating power for much smaller gains. 1st March 2024. Analytical workshop integrating field data, laboratory measurements, and classical heat transfer equations to model the day 15 scenario. External air at 60 degrees, 51 degrees. Sustained for 24 hours with 10 mph wind. A notebook page displays side-by-side heat balance equations, one labeled cabin wall, the other snow wall. The goal is to calculate required heat input for each shelter to maintain specific interior temperatures, revealing the fundamental thermal performance gap. The heat transfer model uses steady-state conductive loss through the envelope plus infiltration losses. For the cabin, wall area is 60 square meters. Average R value is 7.5, accounting for walls, roof, door, and window. External temperature, 50.1 degrees. Internal target temperature, plus 5 degrees. Temperature differential, 56 degrees. Conductive heat loss, 60 meter x 56 degrees. Watt dar, 7.5. Approximately 4,480 watts, equivalent to 15,300 BTU per hour. Infiltration loss, assuming 1.5 air changes per hour due to wind-driven leakage and door-window gaps. Volume 45 M3. Air density 1.4 kW M3 at cold temperatures. Specific heat 1005 J kK. Energy to heat incoming air 45 M3 x 1.5 x 1.4 Cree M3 x 1005 J Cree KX 56 K 3600 seconds. Approximately 10470 watts or 5020 BTU per hour. Total heat loss approximately 6000 watts or 20,500 BTU per hour. To maintain a poly 5 C interior, the stove must deliver this heat rate continuously. Over 24 hours, the cabin requires 492,000 BTU, translating to firewood at 7,000 BTU per pound and 70% efficiency, 100 pounds of wood per day. If the target interior temperature increases to plus 115 degrees, 59 degrees, more comfortable but still cool, the differential rises to 66 degrees, increasing heat loss to approximately 24,000 BTU per hour, or 576,000 BTU per day, 117 pounds of wood. These calculations confirm the Chapter 9 estimates and show that interior comfort scales linearly with fuel consumption. Marginal warmth improvements demand disproportionate fuel increases. Now model the snow cave. Wall thickness, 70 cm. Snow density, 400 kilo or Muir 3, moderately compacted. Snow thermal conductivity, approximately 0.25 WWm/K, R value per inch, roughly 1.3. Total R value for 70 centimeters, 27.5 inches, approximately R36. Interior surface area, roughly 8 square meters, accounting for dome geometry. External temperature, 51 degrees. Interior wall surface temperature is bounded by snow's melting point, 0 degrees. Heat flows through walls, 8 meters x 51 Celsius. R36, approximately 11 watts or 38 BTU per hour. This is the heat, conducted outward through the snow walls. Interior air temperature equilibrates based on heat input versus this small conductive loss. The occupant's metabolic heat output, approximately 100 watts or 340 BTU per hour, resting. This input exceeds wall losses by nearly tenfold, so interior air warms above the wall temperature until radiation and convection to the wall surfaces balance metabolic input. Measured field data, Chapter 4, shows this equilibrium occurs near 0 to 2 degrees. Interior air stabilizes just slightly colder than the wall surface, with occupant body heat continuously replenishing the small conductive loss. Even if external air drops to 60 degree key or colder, the interior behavior changes minimally. The wall surface remains near 0 degrees Celsius because snow cannot cool below freezing without phase change. The gradient across the wall steepens slightly, increasing conductive flux from 11 watts to perhaps 13 watts, still trivial compared to metabolic input. Interior temperature remains near 0 degrees, regardless of external extremes. This decoupling is the snow shelter's fundamental advantage. The temperature differential comparison is dramatic. At 60 degrees outside and plus 32 degrees inside, 0 degrees C, the snow cave's typical interior, the differential is 92 degrees, 51 degrees C. The cabin, burning 100 pounds of wood per day, achieves only plus 41 degrees inside, a 101 degree differential, slightly better, but at immense cost. To achieve plantrum 59 degrees inside, 15 degrees, the cabin needs 117 pounds of wood per day for a 119 degree differential. The snow cave achieves a 92 degree differential with zero additional fuel. The cabin's marginal advantage, 9 to 27 degree hours warmer interior, requires 100 to 117 pounds of daily wood consumption. Sensitivity analysis explores variability. If the cabin's chinking deteriorates, increasing infiltration to 2 air changes per hour, heat loss rises by approximately 30%. Required wood increases to 130 pounds per day at +5 degrees Celsius interior. If wind increases to 20 miles per hour, infiltration may reach 2.5 air changes per hour, pushing wood demand toward 150 pounds per day. Conversely, if the cabin were built with double-wall log construction, R15 to R20, heat loss would drop significantly, reducing fuel to perhaps 60 to 70 pounds per day, still far exceeding the snow cave's zero consumption. For the snow cave, if walls are reduced to 50 centimeter thickness, R25, conductive loss increases to approximately 16 watts. Interior temperature drops slightly, perhaps to 3 or 4 degrees, but the difference is modest. If walls are increased to 90 centimeter, R45, loss decreases to 9 watts, and interior temperature might reach +20 degrees. The performance is relatively insensitive to small thickness variations within the 60 to 90 centimeter range, confirming the guideline's robustness. Field reports and experimental data validate these models. Military cold weather manuals note that snow caves in Antarctic conditions, external air at 40 degrees Celsius with high wind, maintain interiors near 1 to +1 degrees Celsius, with 2 occupants, and no fire. Mountaineering accounts describe similar performance. One documented case from Denali, Alaska, involved climbers weathering a 45°C storm in a snow cave for 3 days. Interior temperature measured 2°C throughout, while tents nearby were abandoned due to structural failure and cold. The occupants reported comfort in sleeping bags, with no fuel used except for brief cooking. Model results confirm what indigenous peoples knew empirically and what scientific studies quantified. At 60 degrees Celsius, the cabin needs continuous high-output heating to approach freezing temperatures inside. The occupant must sustain 20,000 to 25,000 BTU per hour input, consuming 100+ pounds of wood daily, just to achieve marginally survivable conditions. The snow shelter maintains an interior 80 to 92 degrees warmer than outside air with almost no fuel, using only passive insulation and body heat. The cabin struggles to maintain a 100 degrees Celsius gradient despite unsustainable fuel use. The disparity reveals that at extreme cold, conventional wood-based heating scales poorly, while snow-based insulation scales favorably. The thermal physics unambiguously favor the engineered snow shelter. Survival margin quantification via integrated risk metrics. Translating temperature, fuel, and workload data into concrete survival metrics demonstrated that construction complexity directly improved frostbite, hypothermia risk profiles, injury avoidance, and operational capacity during prolonged extreme cold. 8 March 2024. Synthesis of modeled results, historical accounts, and modern cold injury data. A summary table occupies 1 page, listing key metrics for the 21-day cold wave scenario: minimum interior temperature, total wood consumed, estimated hours below critical temperature thresholds, frostbite risk exposure time, and hypothermia risk events. The table compares the standard cabin and the Dubois-type snow cave side by side. Numbers tell the story more clearly than narrative alone. Begin with temperature thresholds and exposure risk. Medical cold injury literature establishes that prolonged exposure to air below 1°C, 30 degrees, without adequate insulation increases hypothermia risk, though the timeline depends on activity, clothing, and shelter. At +5 degrees, 41 degrees, the cabin's modeled interior during extreme cold, occupants wearing typical frontier winter clothing, Wool layers, fur, or leather outer garments can remain indefinitely without core temperature drop, but comfort is marginal. Inactivity, sleep, or injury could shift the balance toward cold stress. The cabin's interior temperature during days 1 to 5 fluctuates between +2 and +7, 36 degauss to 45 degauss, due to fire cycles and fuel procurement interruptions. During days 11 to 15, similar temperatures recur, total hours below +5 degrees Celsius over the 21 days, approximately 180 hours, 37.5% of the time. Although not immediately life-threatening, these hours accumulate cold stress, reduce sleep quality, and increase caloric demand. The occupant is never warm, often merely tolerating cold. The snow cave maintains 0 to 2 degrees Celsius consistently. This is colder than the cabin's target, but occupant experience differs. In the snow cave, the person relies on sleeping bag insulation and clothing, not ambient air temperature. Modern cold weather sleeping bags rated to 20 degrees Celsius or colder, combined with wool clothing and a sleeping pad for floor insulation, easily maintain core temperature in a 0 degrees Celsius shelter. The stable, wind-free environment enhances insulation effectiveness. Crucially, the snow cave occupant is not exposed to temperature fluctuations, fire hazards, or smoke. The environmental stress is constant and manageable rather than variable and exhausting. Frostbite risk connects directly to outdoor exposure. The cabin occupant must procure approximately 2,450 pounds of wood over 21 days. Even with a nearby wood supply, this requires repeated outdoor trips. On days 1 to 5 at a 60 degrees Celsius, each trip risks frostbite to expose skin within 2 minutes. Face, hands, despite mitts, and any gaps in clothing are vulnerable. The occupant must interrupt heating to cut and haul wood, meaning the cabin cools during each trip, forcing him to warm upon return, consuming additional fuel and time. Estimated total outdoor exposure, 80 to 100 hours over 21 days. Estimated frostbite incidence, minor, not severe, 2 to 4. Based on historical accounts where trappers and settlers report frostbitten fingers, noses, or cheeks during prolonged cold spells. The snow cave occupant, having front-loaded construction labor, requires minimal outdoor exposure during the cold wave. Brief trips to retrieve cached food or check surroundings total perhaps 5 to 10 hours over 21 days, a tenth of the cabin occupant's exposure. Frostbite risk is correspondingly reduced. Workload and injury risk compound. Cutting frozen wood at 60 degrees Celsius is hazardous. Axes rebound unpredictably off brittle wood. Chainsaw, if available in modern contexts, oil thickens, and metal parts contract. The worker sweats during exertion, and sweat freezes on clothing, reducing insulation. Fatigue from cold and exertion increases accident likelihood. One entry from a trapper's diary, not the Manitoba diarist, but a similar source, describes an axe accident during a cold spell. Missed the cut, blade struck the boot, foot bleeding, too cold to work further. Such injuries, minor and moderate conditions, become critical when movement and healing are compromised by extreme cold. The snow cave occupant avoids this hazard entirely. No daily woodcutting means no axe or saw use, no risk of cutting injuries, and no fatigue from heavy labor in dangerous temperatures. The front-loaded effort, 16 hours of snow shoveling, carries its own injury risks, back strain, blisters. But these occur once in moderately cold conditions, not repeatedly in life-threatening colds. Operational capacity differs sharply. The cabin occupant spends approximately 4 to 5 hours per day on fuel procurement during the coldest days. Add fire tending, 2 to 3 hours per day in total increments, and 6 to 8 hours daily are consumed by heating-related tasks. Productive work, trap checking, equipment repair, hunting, is curtailed or impossible. The occupant is in survival mode, not operational mode. The snow cave occupant, freed from fuel dependence, retains operational capacity. Assuming the cold wave permits no outdoor travel regardless of shelter, which historical sources confirm, he can focus on equipment maintenance, food preparation, planning, or rest. The difference is quality of survival. One occupant is exhausted and reactive, the other is stable and adaptive. Modern field anecdotes provide additional context. Military cold weather training exercises document that soldiers using snow shelters during Arctic maneuvers report better rest and recovery compared to those in heated tents. The snow shelter's stable, silent environment promotes sleep, while tents subject occupants to stove noise, carbon monoxide concerns, and condensation dripping from fabric walls. Expedition reports describe similar outcomes. One Antarctic traverse account notes, "After the storm destroyed our tents, we excavated snow caves and found them vastly superior. Interior warmth, no wind noise, and no fuel anxiety." Quantifying stupid complexity concretely. The snow cave requires approximately 16 additional hours of construction labor compared to pitching a tent, 1 hour, or occupying an existing cabin, 0 hours. Over a 21-day severe cold wave, this 16-hour investment eliminates 80 to 100 hours of wood procurement labor, reduces frostbite exposure by 90%, eliminates axe-saw injury risk, and maintains stable interior conditions without fuel. The payback ratio exceeds 5.1 in labor alone. Adding risk reduction, the advantage is overwhelming. The chain is clear. Construction complexity, higher insulation and stability, lower fuel and workload, wider survival margin. In conditions matching documented fur country cold waves, the numbers show that a fully engineered snow shelter provides a survival buffer that conventional winter camps cannot achieve, even with far greater fuel consumption and effort. The cabin keeps the occupant marginally alive through heroic fuel expenditure. The snow cave keeps the occupant stable through passive physics. At 60 degrees, the difference is not marginal, it is categorical. Historical adoption patterns and cultural inertia. Ethnographic records documented routine indigenous use of snow houses. Yet European-derived frontier practice largely ignored these methods despite clear benefits, revealing that technology transfer failed due to cultural resistance rather than technical limitations. 1880-1980, Arctic and subarctic regions. Survey of historical usage spanning exploration, military, and mountaineering contexts. A late 19th century ethnographic sketch of an Inuit snow house, published in a Canadian government report, shows detailed cross-sections: entrance tunnel, sleeping platform, domed roof, vent hole. Beside it on the table sits a mid-20th century military survival manual, opened to a page illustrating emergency snow cave construction with similar features. The techniques are nearly identical despite a century separating the documents. The paradox is evident. Indigenous knowledge was documented, observed, and technically proven, yet systematic adoption by European descent frontiersmen occurred late and incompletely. Ethnographic records from the 18th and 19th centuries describe snow houses as routine winter dwellings among Inuit and related groups. Explorers, missionaries, and traders consistently noted these structures. Accounts emphasize warmth, stability, and speed of construction by skilled builders. Some explorers adopted snow houses during travel. Samuel Hearne, journeying to the Coppermine River in the 1770s, described sleeping in snow houses built by indigenous guides and noted their warmth. John Franklin's expeditions in the 1820s included similar observations, though Franklin's own parties often struggled with inadequate tent shelters, leading to near disaster and loss of life in conditions where snow houses might have saved them. Yet adoption remained sporadic among European traders and settlers. Hudson's Bay Company servants occasionally used snow shelters, particularly those working closely with indigenous partners. However, company journals rarely discuss snow houses as standard winter shelter. The default remained log cabins at posts, canvas lodges on trails. Even when extreme cold forced immobility, The response was to endure in existing shelters rather than construct superior alternatives. This pattern persisted through the 19th century. Fur trade posts expanded across the boreal forest and subarctic, operating in conditions ideal for snow shelter use. Deep snowpacks, prolonged severe cold, limited timber in tundra forest transitions. Yet construction practices remained timber-centric. The cultural preference for solid log structures, familiar from European and Eastern North American practice, overrode empirical evidence of snow's thermal advantages. Mountaineering and polar exploration contexts offer contrast. By the early 20th century, Antarctic expeditions routinely used snow shelters. Roald Amundson's South Pole expedition, 1911-12, relied on snow blocks to reinforce tent walls, creating hybrid structures. Later, Antarctic expeditions excavated full snow caves for base camps. These practices arose from necessity. Timber was unavailable, and canvas alone proved inadequate, and from direct observation of Inuit methods during Arctic exploration. Military cold weather doctrine codified snow shelter construction during World War II and the Cold War. U.S. Army and Canadian military manuals from the 1950s onward include detailed instructions, recommended snow depth, minimum 1.5 meters, wall thickness 60 to 90 cm, entrance design below floor level, ventilation 6 to 10 cm vent. These guidelines directly reflect Indigenous techniques, now systematized and validated through testing. Manuals specify collapse risks near thaw, above 4 degrees CC ambient temperature, and emphasize that vents are mandatory with any flame use. Soldiers trained in Alaska, northern Canada, and Norway learned to build quinzees and snow caves as survival skills. Mountaineering handbooks followed similar trajectories. By the 1970s, texts on winter climbing and backcountry skiing included chapters on snow shelter construction. Techniques matched Indigenous and military practice almost exactly. The physics were articulated in accessible terms. Snow is an insulator. Thick walls resist heat loss. Stratified air layers enhance warmth. Vents prevent asphyxiation. The rediscovery and formalization of knowledge that had existed for centuries among Indigenous peoples was complete. Why did this transfer take so long? Cultural inertia provides part of the answer. European descent frontiersmen carried assumptions about proper shelters. Structures with walls, roofs, and doors, built from wood or stone. Snow, in this framework, was an obstacle, not a building material. Sleeping inside snow seemed counterintuitive, even absurd, to men accustomed to equating warmth with fire and solid walls. Risk perception also played a role. Snow structures appear fragile and temporary, despite their actual strength and durability. The idea that a snow dome could support weight, withstand wind, and maintain integrity for weeks seemed implausible to those unfamiliar with snow engineering. Collapse fears, though manageable with proper technique, likely deterred experimentation. The ethnographic literature hints at deeper biases. Indigenous methods were often dismissed as primitive or makeshift, regardless of their technical sophistication. European observers acknowledged effectiveness, yet framed snow houses as adaptations born of resource scarcity, rather than engineered solutions optimized for specific environments. This framing delayed recognition that snow shelters were superior, not merely adequate. The paradox stands: the most thermally efficient shelter available to 19th century fur country workers was documented, observed, and largely ignored by them. Indigenous peoples across the Arctic and subarctic had refined snow shelter design over millennia. The techniques were visible to any trader, trapper, or explorer willing to learn. Yet systematic adoption by European descent populations awaited 20th century military and mountaineering institutions, which formalized and legitimized the methods through scientific testing and official doctrine. By the 1980s, snow shelters were standard content in survival training, outdoor education, and expedition planning. The knowledge gap had closed, at least in specialized communities. Yet even today, broader public awareness of snow shelters remains limited. Many people associate igloos with Inuit culture, but do not realize that similar techniques are accessible to anyone in appropriate snow conditions. The historical underuse persists in modern form. Knowledge exists, performance is proven, yet adoption remains incomplete due to unfamiliarity and cultural habit. The delay in adoption was not due to deficiency in the underlying physics. Snow's thermal properties, measured and modeled in the 20th century, explain what indigenous builders knew empirically. The delay was cultural, rooted in preconceptions about materials, methods, and the legitimacy of indigenous knowledge. Had 19th century traders systematically adopted snow shelters in regions where conditions permitted, countless hours of labor, cords of firewood, and incidents of cold injury could have been avoided. The technology was available. The benefits were observable. The barrier was mindset, practical implementation guidelines, and performance limits. Modern field practice distilled into actionable rules specifying minimum snow depth, wall thickness ranges, entrance configurations, and vent parameters, while identifying conditions where snow shelters are unsafe, establishing both capabilities and boundaries. Present-day, modern homestead training site, boreal forest environment. A laminated checklist lies on a workbench beside a snow-covered field. The header reads, Quingy Construction Checklist. Items listed: snow depth measurement, density assessment, wall thickness target, entrance pit depth, sleeping platform elevation, vent hole diameter, interior volume. The checklist condenses decades of research, indigenous knowledge, and field experience into a practical protocol. Safe Quingy construction requires a minimum snow depth of 1.2 to 1.5 meters. Shallower snow limits wall thickness and interior volume, compromising insulation and structural integrity. Snow density should fall between 250 and 500 kilograms per cubic meter. Very light, dry powder, below 200 km3, lacks cohesion and will not sinter properly, leading to collapse risk. Very dense wet snow, above 600 km3, is difficult to move and may indicate temperatures near thaw, where collapse risk also increases. Ideal snow is packable. It clumps when compressed by hand, but is not waterlogged. The recommended range is 60 to 90 centimeters. Below 60 centimeter, insulation drops significantly and structural strength declines. A 50 centimeter wall provides R30 versus R36 for 70 centimeters, a meaningful reduction. Collapse risk also rises with thin walls, especially if the roof is loaded with additional snowfall. Above 90 centimeters, the marginal insulation gain is small, and the effort to hollow out the extra volume increases construction time without proportional benefit. The 60 to 90 centimeter range balances performance, safety, and labor efficiency. The entrance tunnel should be narrow, 50 to 70 centimeter wide, 40 to 60 centimeter high, and enter the mound from the downwind side to minimize wind intrusion. Critical, the entrance floor must be 30 to 50 centimeters below the interior sleeping platform level. This creates the cold sink that traps dense, cold air and stabilizes stratification. Without this feature, cold air mixes throughout the shelter, degrading thermal performance by 3 to 5 degrees C. The tunnel should curve slightly or include a 90-degree turn if space permits, further reducing wind penetration and enhancing the trap. The platform occupies the rear third to half of the shelter, elevated 30 to 50 centimeters above the entrance floor. It should be wide enough for the occupant plus gear, typically 1 to 1.5 meters wide for a single-person shelter, 1.5 to 2 meters for two-person. The platform surface is packed smooth to provide a firm sleeping surface. A foam pad or spruce boughs insulate the occupant from the snow floor, preventing conductive heat loss into the platform. Vent diameter, 6 to 8 centimeters for single occupants. 8 to 10 centimeters for two occupants, 10 to 12 centimeters if any sustained combustion, stove, fire, occurs inside. The vent is punched through the roof apex, the highest point, using a stick, ski pole, or probe. Placement at the apex ensures rising warm, moist, and contaminated air exits efficiently. The vent must remain clear. Snow can drift over it or frost can plug it. Periodic checks and clearing are mandatory. A vent stick or pole left in place makes this easier. Quinzees are discouraged when ambient air temperature rises above 4 degrees, 25 degrees. At warmer temperatures, snow strength degrades rapidly. Sintering reverses as snow grains begin melting, and structural collapse risk increases. If temperatures fluctuate across the freezing point, shelters may partially collapse or develop weak spots. In such conditions, tent or cabin shelters are safer. Additionally, quinzees require time. Construction plus sintering spans 6 to 12 hours, depending on workforce and snow conditions. They are not emergency shelters for immediate use. A snow trench or insulated tent is faster when time is critical. Any combustion inside a snow shelter produces carbon monoxide and consumes oxygen. Without a vent, CO accumulates to dangerous levels within 90 minutes of stove use or 2 to 3 hours of candle burning. Symptoms include headache, dizziness, and nausea, precursors to unconsciousness and death. The vent must be open whenever any flame is lit. No exceptions. Even without combustion, vents are advisable to manage CO2 buildup from respiration and to control humidity, preventing excessive frost accumulation on interior surfaces. In documented tests and field practice, a correctly built quinzee with an occupied interior maintains temperatures near 0 degrees, 32 degrees, when external air is 25 degrees, 13 degrees, or colder. The interior is largely independent of external temperature within the range of 10 degrees to 60 degrees. Interior to exterior temperature differentials reach 40 to 50 degrees, 72 to 90 degrees in extreme cold. Wood or fuel savings, compared to a heated cabin or tent, range from 20 to 40 kilograms per day, depending on external temperature and desired cabin warmth. Over a week in severe cold, a quinzee eliminates the need for 1/4 to 1/2 cord of firewood. In documented tests and reports, a correctly built snow shelter maintains an interior temperature band roughly 40 to 50 degrees Celsius, warmer than severe Arctic air outside, the same numerical margin that, in fur trade latitudes, often separates survivable shelter from lethal exposure. This is not a theoretical claim, but a measured reality, confirmed by indigenous practice spanning centuries, scientific studies spanning decades, and modern field use spanning global cold regions. The quinzee is not a novelty or desperation tactic. It is an engineered system, optimized through empirical iteration, that transforms snow, a ubiquitous cold weather material, into one of the most effective portable shelters ever developed. The techniques described here are available to anyone with access to adequate snow, basic hand tools, and a willingness to invest construction effort. They require no advanced technology, no specialized materials, and no permanent environmental alteration. The shelter is temporary. The snow reintegrates into the snowpack after use, and the site shows no lasting trace. In an era when frontier history is often romanticized or oversimplified, the quinzee stands as a practical reminder. Survival often hinges not on brute force or stoic endurance, but on observation, adaptation, and the application of measured principles. The frontiersmen who dismissed snow shelters as soft missed an opportunity to apply indigenous engineering wisdom that would have saved labor, fuel, and lives. The record is clear. The numbers are documented, and the technique remains as viable today as it was 2 centuries ago.